The Chicago Blackhawks offense gets completely stymied by the Bruins for the second time in the early going this season. I'll go over my full thoughts from the 3-0 loss, as well as Lukas Reichel's continued struggles, and I'll also discuss what Luke Richardson should do with Wyatt Kaiser. All that and plenty more right here on Locked On Blackhawks.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everyone? Welcome on into another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, thank you all for making the show your very first listen here to start off your day. I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can go and give me a follow on X at JackBushman2, or you can go and check out my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. And also just a reminder to please go and show some support if you haven't done so already. Go and smash that like button. Comment down below as to what you think the Hawks should do with Lukas Reichel, given that he's gone 7 games without a point so far this season. And of course, be sure to go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. It's 100% for free. It won't cost you anything, and it really does help me out tremendously. So please make sure to go and do that. And you can also go and turn on those push notifications to get notified when the episode's uploaded each and every day. And today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks is brought to you by Game Time. Go and download the Game Time app right now and use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps for $20 off to sporting events, concerts, or theater events near you. All right, good afternoon, everyone. As always, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. The early season gauntlet of a schedule continues to get the best of the Chicago Blackhawks here, as last night they dropped their third consecutive game, falling 3-0 to the Boston Bruins at the United Center. The second time that they've been shut out in their last 3 games and in the early going so far here this season, and that drops them down to 2-5-0 through their first 7 games, while the Boston Bruins remain undefeated. They advance to 6-0, and as I'm sure you all have heard many of times by now, it's not going to get any easier for the Chicago Blackhawks. As their next game, they head back out west in Vegas to take on the currently undefeated Golden Knights. And then after that, they still have 2 matchups each with the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Florida Panthers in the next couple of weeks. It is an absolutely brutal stretch to kick things off here for the Blackhawks this season. But yeah, last night was just kind of another toughie against one of the top teams in the NHL. It kind of felt like an eerily similar start to the home opener over the weekend against Vegas, because the first period, the Blackhawks actually looked pretty decent. I wouldn't say it was their best first period. They got outshot by 3, 12-9, but the analytics were pretty good and suggested, both in terms of the analytics and in terms of the eye test, that they were hanging in there with the Boston Bruins early, and it looked like for the second time in as many games at the United Center that Connor Bedard had gotten the Blackhawks off to an early 1-0 lead. A dreadful backhand centering pass by Charlie Coyle serves as a one-timer for Bedard in the slot, and he absolutely hammered it past Jeremy Swayman and hit the good old boom, 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 the mow him down vintage Patrick Kane celly that we saw a lot of comparisons of on social media. Unfortunately, the goal wound up getting overturned because of offsides, which ended up sparking a little bit of a debate of its own on social media, right? Because offsides has just become way too prevalent in the NHL. And the rule that they implemented, I quite honestly don't think it's being utilized properly or how they imagined it to be. I don't think they envisioned this being a crucial aspect of like each and every game where there's like these little ticky-tacky calls, and at game speed, it's impossible to tell. But when you have the replay ability and can go look at everything in slow motion, it kind of makes everything frustrating. And of course, it slows the game down as well. And I don't know who it was, and I'm sorry that I'm not able to remember the name, but someone brought up on X last night an idea about how, like, once there's been 7 or 8 seconds after a zone entry and there's been controlled zone time, I do think there should be some rule where offsides is no longer in effect, because it really doesn't have a bearing on the play after a certain amount of time. But regardless, Bedard's, what would have been his third goal of the season, wounds up getting overturned. Nothing after the opening 20 minutes. As I mentioned, the Blackhawks weren't great, but they also weren't dreadful. It was a period and a start you would absolutely take each and every time against this Boston Bruins team. But the start of the second period was really when things started to take a turn for the worse for this Blackhawks bunch. Pavel Zacha got a piece of Kevin Shattenkirk's shot from the point, and Shattenkirk, by the way, was in the lineup over Ian Mitchell, who played in the Bruins last game before entering Chicago. And I figured this would be a really good opportunity for Jim Montgomery to give Mitchell another crack in the lineup. I'm sure this was a game he probably had start on his calendar, but unfortunately for the former Hawks second round pick, wound up being a healthy scratch in this one, but might have been the right call by Coach Jim Montgomery, because Shattenkirk wound up picking up a primary assist here. Kevin Korchinski actually committed kind of an unnecessary defensive zone turnover, and then wasn't able to recover and get to Zacha in front of the net. Connor Geekie was wide open on the other side as well. That wound up being the only goal that the Bruins potted in the second period, but quite honestly, if you were watching, it easily could have been more. Peter Mrazek continued to do really good things last night, but the Bruins outshot the Blackhawks 18-7 and really grabbed control of the game in that middle frame, and the Blackhawks were just never able to get that control back the rest of the way. Early on in the third, Corey Perry goes and commits just an absolutely dreadful turnover in the neutral zone. It almost looked like his controller ran out of batteries there, just completely ran out of steam, gets blown by. That leads to the Bruins' second goal of the game, and then just 56 seconds later, kind of a gross defensive sequence as a whole for the Blackhawks. A little bit of a scramble out in front of Peter Mrazek, and Trent Frederick, his second goal in as many games against the Blackhawks this season, he winds up putting the puck into the yawning cage. That made it 3-0, pretty much the nail in the hammer there for the Blackhawks. They wind up not doing all that much down the stretch offensively and end up with 23 shots on goal on the night. It's now the third consecutive game where they finished under 25, while the Bruins led largely in that category. They doubled up the Blackhawks, winning that margin 43-23. And yeah, the Blackhawks failed to find the back of the net for the second time in their last three games. And the kind of question I was asking myself after the conclusion of this game was, well, is this because of the schedule? Is it because they're going through the ringer here and had another game against another undefeated team? Or is it just because they played poorly? And I think it was probably a combination of somewhere in the middle. And what's been kind of apparent to me for the Blackhawks here in their first 7 games, again, not the biggest sample size, but we are starting to get a little bit of a greater understanding of what this team is and what they can be this season. And what's been pretty obvious to me is the Blackhawks just haven't had the gas tank, or haven't had the ability to put it all together for a full 60 minutes. It really hasn't happened this season, other than their 4-1 win they had up in Toronto. Even their second win of the season, or I guess technically their other win, I guess I should say, that they have this season in the season opener against the Penguins. If you all remember correctly, they didn't get off to a great start. They fell behind 2-0 in that one and largely won that game because of a third period comeback. So they just haven't been able to take it to that next gear. Now, again, it is a little bit harder to judge them when they're going up against constantly undefeated teams or the best teams in the NHL, but it does seem like they're just not quite ready to get over that hurdle. And that shouldn't be the most surprising news, right? Like, that was kind of what I was outlining going into this season, was I do believe the Blackhawks have the fight and have the heart and have the compete level to hang in there with these teams, but I'm not sure they're ready to kind of go and beat the best of the bunch. But it is just another reminder of where they're currently at through their first 7 games. It seems like, yeah, they can do some good things in the first period and even in the second, again, like they did in their second game of the season against the Bruins. And as we've seen from them often this season, they can hang in there through 20 to 40 minutes. But when push comes to shove and when it comes to crunch time, then they haven't been able to clear that hurdle just yet. So just another reminder of where the Blackhawks are at right now, and also how far they still have to go before becoming a force in this league once again. As far as my 3 stars of the game go for this one, undoubtedly Peter Mrazek is the number one star. The goaltending continues to just be outstanding for the Chicago Blackhawks. Peter Mrazek stopped 40 of the 43 shots that he faced, was probably their best player all night long, especially in that second period. I outlined the Bruins had only one goal, but they outshot the Blackhawks 18-7, and it felt like the game was potentially in the balance of getting ugly and getting lopsided and turning heavily into the Bruins' favor. But Peter Mrazek was really the one that kept that from happening. So got to give him a lot of credit. And he's now faced 40 shots in 3 of his first 4 starts this season. So the Blackhawks defense has not been able to kind of give him the necessary help. Again, though, facing a lot of very good offenses, but that's also to be expected considering that they have 3 rookies on the back end right now. But Peter Mrazek has been unbelievable to kick off this season. A .925 save percentage through his first 4 games. The goals against average is 3.03, but it easily could be up into the 4s if he wasn't spectacular. He's been facing a juggernaut of shots, and he's been holding up his end of the bargain, as has Arvid Soderblom as well. Second star of the game, kind of hard to give out 3 stars in a Blackhawks 3-0 loss where they didn't muster up all that much offensively, but I'm giving the second star of the game to Philipp Kurashev, who made his season debut after missing the first 6 games due to a wrist injury. He didn't have a shot on goal, but in his 17 minutes and 45 seconds of time on ice, I thought he was really effective and showed some good speed bursts and had a couple of good flashes. And because of that, he actually got an opportunity late in the game on the top line with Connor Bedard and Nick Foligno. And that continues to be a little bit of a revolving door with Taylor Hall out of the lineup. But Coach Luke Richardson said after the game that he thought Kurashev might have been their best player and also hinted that he may be getting a crack on the top line with Connor Bedard in their next game against Vegas. So Philipp Kurashev's my second star of the game. And then third star, I'm giving it to Connor Murphy. He had a team-high 3 block shots, added 1 hit and 1 shot on goal in 20 minutes and 50 seconds of time on ice, which was the second most among all Blackhawks defensemen. And he and the Alex Vlasic pairing were kind of the highlight for the Blackhawks defensively in this one. And in the 2 games that they've been paired together now, they've done some really spectacular things. And I've thought Connor Murphy in his past, not only these 2 games, but 3 or 4, he's really gotten it going and has been playing a little bit better defensively. That's been very apparent to me. So I'm giving Connor Murphy the third star of the game. Continues to kind of build here in the early going, which you love to see, is they got to lean on him heavily as a defensive anchor for this Blackhawks team this season. All right, folks, coming up in just a moment here, I will get into some of my other takeaways from last night's loss, and we'll also have a debate on what Luke Richardson should do with Lukas Reichel. But first, I need to talk to you all about Game Time. You shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to the next big event. And Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And I personally have used Game Time for probably close to a decade now when I was going to Blackhawks games as a 17 or 18-year-old. And even when I went to college in Missouri, I would always use Game Time to go and see the Cubs whenever they were in town to face off with the St. Louis Cardinals. I've always thought it was the cheapest and easiest way for me to purchase all of my tickets, whether I'm going to a Blackhawks game, a Cubs game, or going to see a sports game in any city. I also love how Game Time offers views from all their seats in the venue, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. I highly recommend that you all go and download the Game Time app right now. And if you go and create an account and use the promo code Locked On NHL, then you'll get $20 off with your first purchase. Again, you can get $20 off to come and see Connor Bedard and the Blackhawks play at the United Center this season. All you have to do is download the Game Time app and use the promo code Locked On NHL in all caps for $20 off. Last minute ticket deals, lowest price guaranteed. Game Time. All right, back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Segment 2, getting into some of my other takeaways here real quick from the Blackhawks 3-0 shutout loss to the Boston Bruins. I mentioned yesterday in my 3 keys to victory segment in my preview of the matchup with the Bruins that the penalty kill needed to put its mini little skid to a halt after giving up 3 power play goals in their last 2 games entering last night's contest. I knew it was going to be paramount to the Blackhawks' success not to allow the Boston Bruins power play to take over. I envision this being a low-scoring game, and given that it's hard to score even 2 goals against this Boston Bruins defense, if the Hawks PK showed any cracks and gave up a PPG to the Bruins, it was going to be tough for the Blackhawks to come out with the victory. Well, they obviously got shut out and they didn't come out with that victory, but the penalty kill did a lot of good things last night as well. They finished 4 for 4 on the night and didn't really give up all that many quality chances. And I thought Boris Kachuk and Taylor Radish were really spectacular on the forecheck and even created some offensive zone time to kill off some clock. And Murphy and Alex Vlasic on the back end really stood out to me on the penalty kill as well. I've loved what those two defensively have done together so far this season. And as I mentioned on X, I think you can quite honestly make a case that Alex Vlasic has been the Blackhawks' best defenseman through their first 7 games. He has been nothing short of spectacular. Connor Bedard last night, other than his early goal that got overturned, it looked like his 3rd goal of the season. It felt like every time he had the puck on his stick, whether it was at 5-on-5 or on the Blackhawks' 3 power play chances that they pissed away, it felt like he was always trying to do too much. And that's been a little bit of a common theme for him so far in his first 7 NHL games. And I know that's part of the learning curve, and those are things that he's going to have to deal with. But it does feel like he still needs to simplify his game a little bit. And it felt that way throughout the preseason as well, right? Like he was almost forcing things a little bit too much at times. And at the same point in time, I do think he kind of has to take a little bit more charge of puck control, given that Taylor Hall is out of the lineup. But it feels like simplifying his game. And again, just something that he's going to have to learn here. It feels like that's something that he's going to have to deal with, though. He did have 3 shot attempts on the night, but wound up with no shots on goal for the second time in his last 3 games. Blackhawks offense, again, just wasn't able to create all that much against this sturdy Bruins defense, if you will. And speaking of Connor Bedard, Philip Kurashev, as I outlined in my stars of the game, Philip Kurashev saw some time with Connor Bedard and Nick Foligno on the top line at the end of the game. Luke Richardson said that's a possibility of something that he could be rolling with moving forward. But at this point in time, it is very clear without a healthy Taylor Hall, the Chicago Blackhawks don't seem to have enough help or enough talent around Connor Bedard, and it's kind of unfortunate for him. And on that note, is it time to move Lukas Reichel from the second line center and to give him an opportunity not only on the top line with Connor Bedard, but also on the Blackhawks' top power play unit? Because Lukas Reichel did have a team-high 3 shots on goal last night and had his chances, still has not been able to get the finished product and is without a point through his first 7 games this season. And he also had a team low ice time through the opening 20 minutes. That's happened a couple of times through these first 7 games. It's just been a weird start to the season for Lukas Reichel, man. And you just got to wonder, when is enough for Luke Richardson to move him from the second line center spot? And I personally do still think it's a little early, and it's been nice to see both Bedard and Lukas Reichel take some strides at the faceoff dot. Bedard won 6 of his 11 draws last night, and Reichel won 8 of his 12, and that's still going to be an entire process. They're not going to get better right here, right now, but you do want to give them those opportunities. But I would say, Blackhawks fans, if Lukas Reichel goes his first 10 games, if he goes these next 3 games without recording a point, I think that's when Luke Richardson kind of has no choice. And it almost feels like, 10 games without a point, I'm sure it's tough mentally for Lukas Reichel right now, and I'm sure 10 games without a point would be even tougher. And even just for the sake of his confidence, you might have to move him to the wing with Connor Bedard and just let those two go and cook and move him on that top power play unit, because there's been a lot of guys that Reichel has played with on the second line, and just nothing has worked so far this season. And you do not, in my opinion, want to be sending him back to Rockford. Like it's been clear cut since training camp began. And even before that, we all knew Lukas Reichel was going to be a full-time NHLer this season. If he goes back to Rockford for the 3rd consecutive year, I really would be worried about his confidence, and that's a move I don't think Kyle Davidson wants to do. So if Lukas Reichel isn't able to produce something here in these next 3 games, I think then it would be time to move him to the top line with Connor Bedard. And then I also wanted to talk about Luke Richardson's comments following the game as well, because Richardson kind of seemed as upset as we've heard him since taking over behind the bench for the Chicago Blackhawks. And here's what he had to say after the game, quote, "I'm kind of at the point where I'm tired. 1 year is enough that we're a hard-working team. I think we want to push for more this year." And I personally love this approach from Luke Richardson, because I think all of us after this loss to the Bruins very easily could have said, oh yeah, it's the Boston Bruins. These things are going to happen. But that's what separates Luke Richardson from us. He isn't happy with just staying put this season and being a hard-working team that can compete for stretches against some of the best teams in the NHL. Now, is this a valid criticism from Luke Richardson? Maybe not, but at the same point in time, I think it is the right time to send a message. It's not going to get any easier for this Blackhawks team, but that means they have to work even harder. And it seemed like he was quite frankly pissed off with their effort later on in this game. And maybe not their work ethic, as he called it, but just how hard guys were going in one-on-one battles. It seems like the Bruins were getting the better of those, and that's something that absolutely has to flip for the Chicago Blackhawks to take this next step. Now, maybe that's not going to result in victories, but it should hopefully lead to more full 60-minute efforts. And as I outlined in segment 1, my biggest takeaway early on from the Blackhawks this season is they just haven't been able to put together that full 60-minute effort against the best teams. I didn't expect them to this season, but it would be a nice stride. And as a head coach, you're not going to be satisfied with a 2-5-0 start, even with the roster you have. And even if the expectations for this Blackhawks team from the outside may not be, anything special this season, that's not the mentality that Luke Richardson is providing in that locker room. And it wasn't the mentality that he was even providing last season when the tank was full blown on for the Chicago Blackhawks. So to me, I think this is just the right type of Kickstarter type of move from Luke Richardson. Is it maybe an unfair criticism of his team against another undefeated squad in a gauntlet of a schedule early on? Yeah, perhaps. But at the same point in time, someone's got to be pushing the buttons and someone's got to expect better things from these Chicago Blackhawks. And I love to hear that it's our captain behind the bench in Luke Richardson. All right, Blackhawks fans, coming up in just a moment here, I will continue on into my thoughts on defenseman Wyatt Kaiser's struggles in the early going this season and whether or not we could see him getting sent down to Rockford here soon. But first, I need to talk to you all about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience is what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and to level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. Plus, with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you'll get your money back. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. With all the parts that you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and to bring home that win. Again, that's ebaymotors.com. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Once again, just a reminder to please go and smash that like button. Comment down below as to how you think Luke Richardson should handle Lukas Reichel moving forward. And of course, go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. It'll only take a quick click of the button and won't cost you anything. And also go and follow Locked On Blackhawks on Instagram as well. Recently, I've been sharing a lot of cool Blackhawks related clips and videos and pictures and highlights of their prospects and such. And also just short little cuts right here from the show. Make sure to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks on Instagram for some other cool Blackhawks little tidbits. All right, segment 3. I haven't talked about Wyatt Kaiser's struggles last night yet on the show here today, and that was for a reason, because here in segment 3, I want to discuss what's kind of the next move for Wyatt Kaiser, because it's become clear here in the early going it's not working for him well on the third defensive pairing. Last night, he and Jared Tenorti just had an absolutely putrid night. I mean, it was ugly, horrible analytical numbers. stuck in their own zone all night long, way too many turnovers. It was not very good. And through these first 7 games, it hasn't been easy for Wyatt Kaiser after he had, quite honestly, an excellent training camp and preseason. He's been the young defenseman of the 3 that struggled the most, undoubtedly. But at the same point in time, he's the one who hasn't been inside the Blackhawks top 4 and has been stuck playing with Jared Tenorti and Nikita Zaitsev so far this season, neither of which have been very good whatsoever. So it has been a little bit tough to kind of digest whether it's solely Kaiser's struggles, his defensive partners, or a little bit of both. And as I try to do more times than not, I probably try to fit somewhere in the middle. And I think it's likely a combination of both, but there's no denying that it has been a tough start to the season for Wyatt Kaiser after it really looked like he was going to be taking that next step. But at the same time, too, not only has he been stuck with Jared Tenorti and Nikita Zaitsev, he's also been bouncing back and forth to his off wing, which, he did a little bit last season, but only once in his 9 NHL games. I don't think it was something he did much in college, so probably something that he's still kind of picking up on the fly. And again, he hasn't had a very sturdy defensive partner to kind of rely on there a little bit. And you have to wonder if the front office, Kyle Davidson, has considered whether or not to send down Wyatt Kaiser to the Rockford IceHogs and to recall Isaac Phillips, who kind of wound up being the odd man out there in training camp, but did look like a NHL defenseman at the end of last season. And I mean, Rockford wouldn't be the worst thing for Phillips for the entirety of the season, but I don't know he has all that much more to prove at the AHL level. And yeah, you just have to wonder, has Kyle Davidson thought about reassigning Wyatt Kaiser to the Rockford IceHogs and recalling Isaac Phillips, especially with this being a season where the patience approach from the front office is still fully in play, and there is no reason to absolutely rush guys if they aren't 100% ready. And in my full opinion, it doesn't look like Wyatt Kaiser is 100% ready. And that's why leading up to the season, before he had that kind of outburst in training camp, I figured he was probably going to begin the season in Rockford. That's really the path the Blackhawks went with Alex Vlasic last season, and that's looked like it's worked wonders so far here in the early going. But the one thing I will say, Blackhawks fans, is before a decision comes on whether or not they should send Wyatt Kaiser to Rockford, I do think, considering the ascension that Vlasic has had here through these first 7 games, and as I've mentioned, I do think there's a case to be made that he's been the Blackhawks' best defenseman so far. I do wonder if you give Wyatt Kaiser an opportunity to play on the top defensive pairing with Seth Jones, or even on the second defensive pairing with Connor Murphy, because Vlasic looks like he's capable of being a defensive stalwart himself. Now, I don't want to get ahead of myself. Only 7 games into the season and like 24, 25 games into his NHL career, but we've seen a lot of good signs from him. And I feel like he'll just be able to more so lead a defensive pairing than Wyatt Kaiser. He's more capable of doing that than Wyatt Kaiser is at this point in time. And I think there's just a better chance that Alex Vlasic could make it work with Nikita Zaitsev or Jared Tenorti than Wyatt Kaiser could. So I personally think it would only be fair to give Wyatt Kaiser that opportunity. And I also think it would just give us a little bit better of an evaluation of where he's at this point in time. And we'll get that answer as to whether it's his struggles or more so on his defensive partners. But as we all know in this world, it's not always about what's fair. And who knows if Wyatt Kaiser is going to get that opportunity. That's just personally what I would do before coming to a decision one way or another on what to do with him. But I wouldn't be surprised if we do see Wyatt Kaiser reassigned to Rockford at some point, just considering, again, the patient mentality that's been put into play. But I will admit, I don't think it's quite fair to judge him, again, only on a 7-game stint, a very small sample size here. And also what he's done with Jared Tenorti and Nikita Zaitsev as his defensive partners through these first 7 games. All right, folks, I think that is going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, thank you all again for tuning into the show, and be sure to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free right now, wherever you may be listening to your podcast, and to go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. And that way you can get the latest episode as soon as it becomes available each and every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Go and give me a follow on X at JackBushman2, and be sure to go and follow my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey for all of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. So until tomorrow's episode, that's going to do it here for the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network,